For me, this is a common occurrence where I use a budget phone and question why this even exists, almost feeling like e-waste. Phones like the $100 or cheaper Samsung A52 5G make sense, but the Samsung Galaxy A52 5G doesn't. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, and again, I have a budget phone that I'm not really a fan of. Either way, let's see if there's some merit to my intro and see if this phone is still worth buying in 2023 and moving on to 2024. If you've seen my videos in the past, you might know that budget phones aren't my favorite. I actually remember using the ZTE Axon 7 Mini and enjoying that phone, but using the Samsung A42 was not my favorite, and I definitely did not like using the Samsung A20. There are two things that budget phones definitely have, and those are cheaper new prices and battery life. Not that the battery is big, this one being a 4,500 mAh cell, but more the fact that the Snapdragon 720G chip will suck up less power than a flagship phone. While better battery life is technically true, it's kind of flawed. The thing is, if operations take longer to run, then you're using the battery for a longer time. So it might be efficient for small tasks, but things like social media will show a bigger performance hit that drains the battery quicker. Of course, this is a budget phone after all. It's not made for big games or big tasks, and the benchmarks definitely prove that. But this is a phone that's commonly found for around $140 or more, but with performance numbers that rival the Snapdragon 845 chip or a Samsung S9. The only thing that the A52 has over the S9 is battery life, maybe, and definitely software support. The Samsung A52 runs on Android 13 and is said to get Android 14 when it does come out for Samsung devices. And battery life now is fine. It charges via USB-C at up to 25 watts with no wireless charging at all. This phone, however, is a couple years old, so say farewell to trying to be the battery champ, but there are some benefits. Changing the battery is decently easy and cheap. Not to mention that the IP67 dust and water resistance that this phone has is most likely gone after the average use of this phone, and the fact that it's a couple years old, but also easier to do work on this phone because the back is plastic. You don't really have to worry about breaking glass because it's not. The thing is, this phone is plastic on the back and on the sides, which is a weird one because it's a 5G phone and the A51 5G was metal on the sides. Yep, all that plastic around the phone and buttons, but the front is glass, Gorilla Glass 5 at that. The screen is also OLED, being a 6.5-inch 1080p display that runs at 90 Hz and is capable of 800 nits of peak brightness. I doubt that it gets that bright for me, but daily usage left me with no issue seeing the screen. We get an always-on display, which all of this is nice to see on a budget phone, but then again, this phone was $500 at launch. Yes, $500 for a phone that can be found for $150 with the processor that's inferior to the A42 that was released a year prior at $400 and can be found used for $100. Of course, the A52 is the better phone here, but that's the common issue with budget phones. I told you performance is close to the Samsung S9, but launched with the Samsung S21. The S21 Plus was $1,000 brand new, while the A52 5G was $500 brand new. Now, you can find the Samsung S21 Plus for around $200, while the A52 5G is about $150 or more. You see what I'm trying to say here? Sure, walking into a store and buying a budget phone, like the modern $450 A54 5G, is definitely going to be cheaper than the $1,000 Samsung S23 Plus. But that phone is $600 when buying used. So in the beginning, buying a new budget phone does make sense, but it's also very easy to just buy a used flagship device, which is not only better for you, but technically a little bit better on the environment. But let's just say you want this phone, or someone's giving you this phone. What do you actually get with a Samsung A52 5G? Well, of course, you get stuff that I already went over, like a budget processor and good enough battery life, but you do get memory card support, even supporting the new 1.5 terabyte SD card. You also get 6 GB of RAM, which is technically upgradable virtually to a total of 12 GB, but the RAM feels faster than the processor, so it's not going to be that big of an issue. You get dual speakers, meaning that the bottom speaker and the earpiece speaker pair up to attempt a stereo feel. Quality is actually pretty decent for what this phone is. Vibrating motor, however, is terrible. I never understand why they cheap out on these, because the motors are dirt cheap. And phones like the Samsung S8 and the S10, which have the exact same ones, are like $1. I can literally buy the S21 Ultra motor for literally $1. So what's Samsung's excuse? We're missing other things like Wi-Fi 6 and wireless charging, while you're also stuck with the USB 2.0 and Bluetooth 5.0. We do get things like an SD card slot that I talked about a few seconds ago, but we also get a headset jack, which is pretty nice. We even have an in-screen fingerprint scanner that hates my right thumb for some reason, but if that doesn't really work for you, the face unlock is here, though it is kind of slow. There are some premium things that are overshadowed by some budget things, weird ones at that. The plastic back can be annoying, like how this back is a service pack from Samsung, but for some reason the plastic back doesn't really stick properly. I actually had to add my own adhesive to make it fit better. And yeah, even if I didn't replace the back plastic, I am very doubtful that water resistance still exists on this specific phone given the age. The phone feels light because of the plastic build, even though 189 grams isn't super heavy, but also isn't super light. It is strange to give this a category because there's only 2 usable lenses, in my eyes at least. The main sensor on the back is a 64 megapixel sensor that can bin down to 16 megapixel shots, or shoot at 64 megapixels. We actually get optical image stabilization, which is surprising for a budget phone, but obviously only on that sensor. As for video, 4K at 30 frames per second is the highest that this goes, but that might be because of the processor that's limiting it. The next one is a 12 megapixel ultra wide, which is fine. Not the best to complement the main sensor, but it's usable for sure. Then we have a 5 megapixel macro lens, which is fine, but 100% gimmicky, and a 5 megapixel depth sensor, which, come on. The whole multicam for nothing is a terrible trend, and I'm glad that companies are actually moving away from that. Then the front camera is a 32 megapixel sensor, which bins down to 8 megapixels when needed. Quality is okay, but at least we get 4K video at 30 frames per second max. The main sensor isn't terrible, but just like classic budget phones, we do get that budget feel at times. I just can't understand why companies focus on adding so many lenses to produce gimmicks. Just give us a 40 megapixel shot, let us 2x crop into that sensor, and an ultra wide. That's all we need. I definitely do despise budget phones, there's no arguing there. I was actually a fan of this phone, very curious to use it honestly, but the biggest deal breaker is the processor. If battery life is bad for you, charging speed is pretty decent, so I wouldn't really worry too much about that. But there's things like if you leave this phone sitting and you try to activate it, the screen will just go black before showing your background, which is very old school because decent processor phones shouldn't do that. And then there's the pricing. Even looking at modern phones like the A54, it doesn't really make sense because performance on that phone is similar to the Samsung S20, but the S21 Plus is a better price, even if you do compare those to used prices. If you take the time to check out reviews, then you can probably understand that buying used is perfectly fine and highly recommended, even if the phone's a couple years old. So if you get a pretty good deal on the Samsung A52, I would say $100 is worth it in 2023, but going into 2024, it's hard to say. Sure, the phone will support Android 14, but so will the Samsung A13. Doesn't mean it's going to be good. And that concludes my review of the Samsung A52 5G, the expensive budget phone. But what do you think? Am I correct in my thinking, but it only applies to the US? Let me know what you think, and as always, thanks for watching.